any of those things that I normally can see on my computer. So,
All right, we'll start us off.
hey everybody, welcome to the Sam and Cole podcast. Sam Kavaris, Cole Pepper with you. We are recording this the first week of June, and you might say that there's some downtime coming up, and maybe a little downtime around here. Once again, thanks to Champion Cycling for their continued support. Phil and Brian and the whole gang at the three locations: Arlington, the Beach, and Mandarin as well. Would you say it's?
I don't know what this downtime is you're talking about, Sam.
Well, I was going to say, is it some downtime or no?
Well, not for me.
Toward the end here, though, right? I mean, it's it's the end of the Armada season,
of the Armada
right?
spring season. Yeah,
spring season, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what I'm saying. And that we're getting to the end of the Jaguars OTAs. It's going to be a mini camp, and then there's some time before the end of July when kind of the Armada will start kicking back up and start preparing for the fall season and all that, right? And
it's
of course, the Jaguars.
Yeah, there's only a 3-week break for the Armada, and they may wind up playing a friendly in there as well, and then July 5th they start the fall season on the road at Ottawa. The first home match isn't until July the 18th when the New York Cosmos come to town for the one and only time this year. There is a little bit of a break here, though. If you want to say post mini camp for the Jags and before that fall season begins, it's not as much of a break as it used to be for me anyway.
So why does the NASL have their season so kind of chopped in half and spread out like that? What do you think the reasoning is?
Well, part of it is the growth of the league and how it's grown. They wanted to create a situation where as many games as possible mattered. In, as you know, European football and South American football, soccer, when you have promotion relegation, that keeps games interesting for almost everybody, with the possible exception of some of those mid-table teams that aren't going to be a promoted team or a top 4 team or a top 6 or whatever it is to go to Champions League or Europe,
right?
League. And so without promotion relegation, they had to find a way to keep things interesting. Also, they wanted to create a situation where somebody's calling into somebody here. They want to create a situation where there are there was a playoff system. And unlike, say, the EPL that's got the, the champion is the best overall record at the end of the year.
In the regular season, right?
In the regular season, there is no postseason in the EPL. There's no postseason in almost any other soccer league around the world. But this is America. We like the playoffs. So you got to make the playoffs. I mean, the MLS has a big playoff bracket.
Right.
It's a 4-team playoff in the NASL. So the thought was you either split the season in half and do 15 matches in the first half, 15 in the second. But there's a little bit of an imbalance in terms of the schedule from that standpoint. And this year, when you had 11 teams in the league, you have an opportunity to make it where every team plays every other team once in the spring. That would be 10 matches. And then everybody plays everybody home and away in the second half in the fall season. And that's 20 matches. And it gives you a 30-match season. So I know that they talked about whether they would change that. And I think it may change as the league grows. They're already talking about adding teams in and growing the league as years go on. So I think you'll see probably that change a little bit as it goes on. But I do think you'll still see a first half, second half kind of situation. So you have, matches that matter almost every week.
Although I will say that if you read anything about the original NASL, which was in the 80s and into there, the number one thing that everybody involved with the league says was that they didn't belong in places like Jacksonville and Sacramento and Birmingham and places like that. That expansion is the thing that basically killed the league off.
Yeah.
There's I think you have to be very careful with expansion. And the NFL, I think, is a good example. I think Major League Baseball has done a good job in terms of managing, what the real demand is. And you look at basketball, never really had to expand after taking in the ABA. So, I mean, there's some, there's some historical lessons there that I think that you've got to be very careful about.
Oh, I think you can outgrow yourself. I think growing too fast is definitely a danger. And maybe not growing too fast, but growing without the right filter on who you're bringing into the league. And one of the things that the commissioner, Bill Peterson, has talked about is he'd like to grow it over the next 4 to 5 years to 18 to 20 teams. And if, that's no more than that. And they've been very particular about the kind of people they've brought in as owners. So as they're looking around, and whether it's, this group in Miami that has, a lot of money behind it and a lot of great connections in the soccer world, or elsewhere. And they're looking at teams in the West Coast. They're not looking at Birmingham and, Mobile for cities. They're looking at, LA and San Francisco, and, in some cases going to cities where there's already an MLS team like Chicago, could be really big markets to see if they can compete there. And it's got to be under the right circumstances, of course. There are also, the difference between now and the original NASL is that you've had opportunities to grow a lot of these markets in soccer. And one city that I haven't really heard talked about in terms of it being an NASL city, but I like St. Louis is a great soccer town. Soccer town. They've got a USL club, but they're a great, huge youth soccer. Indianapolis had a huge youth soccer base, and they're averaging over 10,000 per game. And remember, in the NASL, if you're drawing over 7,000 a game, that's a pretty good number with the number of games that you have. Right now, that's a good number. Indy's averaging over 10. Jacksonville's averaging right around 10 right now. That number will creep down a bit as they get further and further away from the match at Everbank Field that allowed them to get more. But, I think the thought is, hey, if they can get to the point where NASL teams are averaging around 10,000 as they grow this league, remember this is only the 5th season of the reboot, that'd be a pretty good number. And then the top teams will be building their own facilities and averaging 12 or 16,000, something in that ballpark. Look at Orlando. Orlando developed a very good following, but they weren't having 30,000 people at their USL matches. So you sort of have to grow that community.
So, Cole, what has happened to the Armada? They haven't scored in 281 minutes.
I will tell you the answer. I can tell you in one word.
Okay.
Keita, who is their most
one
dynamic
player can make that much difference.
Well, he's made a huge difference. He's out with an injury, and that's been a huge difference. Not the only reason, obviously. They've had some issues with, they went on the road, and they had a long travel trip where they went from Atlanta to Richmond to Minnesota in the span of 8 days. They played 3 matches, and I don't think they traveled particularly well, quite honestly. I think that wore them down a bit. And so we'll see. Keita might be back this week against the Cosmos up in New York. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of an impact he makes. The other thing that's happened is all the teams that the Armada have faced, because they scored so many goals early, and people were like, wow, look at this. They're coming out and just going full bore at it. Every team they faced, including Minnesota, who's more of a freewheeling team generally, has basically put 10 guys behind the ball, parked the bus on defense and waited for the counter, because they've seen that's how it can be effective against the Armada. That's what Carolina did when they won 4-0 a couple weeks ago. And then this past weekend, Ottawa, who had been playing in a style that was, they have now gone over 400 minutes without allowing a goal. They haven't scored much, but they haven't been giving up any. Really sat back and just put 10 guys in the box. And it's, the Armada don't have that big player that you can, lob one up to and head it in, or on a set piece or a corner. So the Armada are going to have to adjust at some level. But also, this is a system that takes a while to learn. It's a more complicated system, I'm told.
And speaking of that, I mean, they also announced that one of their coaches is leaving at the end of the year. I mean, does that have an impact?
Yeah. I don't get the sense from the players that it's had much of an impact. It's basically the same system. Both came from Argentina, and it didn't. Listen, I thought it was odd that you'd have co-head coaches. I mean, that
right.
It's happened a couple.
I think everybody thought that.
Sure,
okay.
Yeah. I mean, in America, you go co-head coaches. How's this going to work? Right. And I will tell you that Jose Luis Villarreal, who was the head coach, the first hire, and who now has left the team, just a wonderful guy. And I think between the fact that I don't think that marriage worked out exactly the way that he envisioned or hoped, and the fact that his family was having a hard time adjusting, unfortunately, I think that's sort of what happened. But
it's funny because of the two guys, I thought he'd be the guy that stayed.
Well, he had, and this may or may not impress anybody, but he came here having never been in the United States for any length of time, having played in Argentina, grown up there, and so forth, and played in Spain and played in France as a player, and he went from speaking basically no English. At his introductory press conference, he had written down the thing that he wanted to say, and he spelled it out, and it looked like Spanish, but it sounded like English the way
he spelled it out, Spanish phonetics.
Yes, right.
right.
And
that sounded like English.
He went from that to the other day when I saw him in the office as he was getting things wrapped up. I'm having a conversation with. Now he wasn't speaking like you or I do, but it's he really tried hard to make that to adapt and learn that. And I mean, really a class act all the way. It was sad to see him go.
I liked him. I liked him a lot. It certainly will be interesting to see how this whole thing progresses. So I'm anxious to see as they become part of the regular sports scene, that the novelty kind of piece wears off, where their support comes from. You talk about youth soccer. Clearly, we have huge amounts of youth soccer here. And if that does translate into people coming to the ballpark and people enjoying what they have to offer, the style that they play, the experience of seeing those guys play, and I think that to me that's going to be an interesting thing, certainly an interesting thing to watch. We talked about a little bit of a lull. The Jaguars are going to wrap up their OTAs this week, and they've got a mini camp coming up. By the way, you can go to the mini camp if you want on the 18th. It is open to the public. You must register at jaguars.com, but you can go. It's a morning practice at 9:30 in the morning. What you're going to see there is 90 players or so who are clearly a better team than they were. They're faster, they're bigger, they're more professional, and if they're only more professional because Julius Thomas is on the field, it upgrades them several levels.
Is Julius Thomas become the man crush of minicamp?
He should be, because this guy is a pro's pro. He is a player. He understands what his responsibilities are as a player. He's also incredibly talented. So, you don't get those combinations in there. A lot of times you get a guy, he's like Montel Owens in Julius Thomas's skill set.
And there have been a few of those through the years with the Jaguars. And the question is, where is Julius Thomas in terms of his ability to perform on the field? I think he's higher than these guys I'm about to name. But Posluszny, a real pro's pro, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
right,
and has been very good. But I don't think he's where Julius Thomas, where we think he'll be.
If Posluszny is a reserve Pro Bowler, Julius Thomas is a starter.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And Fred Taylor became a pro's pro, but probably after he was as good, he probably was on the downside of his career by the time it all clicked in and he really became that. Still a very good back when he got to that sort of level and understood what it took. And I think you and I have probably both had conversations with Fred about how he matured through the course of his NFL career.
Sure.
And there have been others who have been, really. Aaron Campman was a real pros pro, but the injuries limited what he could do when he was out there for a bit. There was a time, boy, that guy really did it. But I don't think there's been a guy since Tony Baselli who has been a pros pro and performed at that level where it's oh yeah, he's a Pro Bowler. It's not like, oh, he could be a Pro Bowl. He could make the Pro. Where he's a Pro Bowl.
Yeah, and Thomas elevates everybody around him, and I've said this on the air a couple of different times. If you're not a better player because you're on his team, you need to go be on a different team because it means you're not paying attention and you're not trying.
And that'll be huge for Blake Bortles, of course.
Yeah, and I think it's huge. The other thing that you're going to see is Bortles is about 12 pounds lighter, has really improved his quarterback skills because that's what he's worked on. He didn't have to worry about getting in a 40 stance or standing broad jump or vertical leap or anything like that. He just worked on quarterback skills. He also has embraced, similar to what happens in college after you become the starter after a year. Well, you're now the starter the second year. It's your team. Mm-hmm. And you have to be a quarterback that embraces that. The antithesis of that was Blaine Gabbert, never embraced, this is my team. Blake Bortles has embraced that, and his teammates, you can tell, appreciate it. They appreciate the command he has in the huddle, his work ethic, the knowledge that he has of the new offense, the relationship he has with his teammates, the relationship he has with his coaches. All of those things rub off on the whole team. And when you get down to it, if Bortles isn't significantly better, then neither are the Jaguars. So at least he looks like he's stepping in that direction that he has a chance to be significantly better, which would allow the team to be better. Doesn't guarantee they're going to be better. It would allow them to perhaps be better.
Yeah, this is all such tea leaf time of the year in the NFL.
Right.
ESPN, I saw, had or maybe it was Pro Football Focus via ESPN, did a story ranking the rosters in the National Football League, and the Jaguars were 32nd out of 32. Again. Okay. And
behind the Raiders even.
And maybe they're right, but in any case, it's not like the Jaguars roster is 10th and they missed it at 32, right? So this goes back to what you and I have been saying since the season ended last year, which is this is not a team that is knocking on the door to win the AFC South. This is not a team that's probably knocking on the door for a wild card spot. It's a team that's knocking on the door of respectability and
not losing games by double digits.
Yes.
Being in games
like an NFL
in single digits with single minutes to play, like you said last year, which I thought was
that's what it's all
very
about.
Good thing. And I think, you look at it, and I really do. I've come to the conclusion that Gus Bradley has a fairly short leash this year.
No doubt.
Maybe not Dave Caldwell, but I think Bradley has a bit of a short leash. And if they get blown out the way they have in their first couple of years, I think he's got problems. If they're competitive and still don't win games, then it's a decision to be made. But
you probably spend as much time as anybody in the Jacksonville media with Shad Khan.
Yep, probably.
Has your opinion of his trigger finger changed at all over the last 12 months, let's say?
Yes. I believe that he has a little less patience than he had, because even though he believed it was a big project, I think that the factor, all the other things he wants to do with the franchise have to do with respectability. And to me, that's the key, is that even if you're losing, respectability is what the Jaguars don't have. Yet for the third year in a row, the roster is listed as 32nd. Yep. If the Jaguars went 0-16, nobody would bat an eye. So, to me, that's the question that I think Shad is asking himself. And he's, he's a very competitive guy. He wants desperately to use the Jaguars as an entertainment venue for all of his other businesses. And you can do that at a certain level when your team's terrible. You can do it at a whole different level when they're very competitive.
I see John Gohn's doing storm pins, so I know you got to get out and do sports. So we'll reconvene next week and discuss. But I also we'll talk about a couple other topics we'll get into next week as minicamp approaches. That'll do it for the Sam and Cole podcast. Thanks again to the folks. Tell me all their names, Sam, because I don't know each and every.
Yeah, Brian and Phil and all the guys at Champion Cycling, who are, by the way, going to be open on the 4th of July at the beach, and that is a real party if you get a chance to stop by there. It's one of the true traditions at Champion. 3 locations: the beach, Arlington, and Mandarin.
Follow Sam on Twitter at Sam Kavaris. Follow me on Twitter at Cole Pepper, and get us on iTunes and Stitcher. This is the Sam and Cole podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll speak with you next time.